Right, it's a good evening, morning, mangonani, maskati, maneru, whatever time you're watching this video. Thank you for tuning in, and it's another episode of Taura Tinzwe, where we try and get as much of your perspectives as possible to try and see how this fatherhood thing actually rolls out and looks to you on the normal ground. And I think today we want to really just put that thing to say your perspective matters. And so to actually add on to that, we have a guest today, a special guest, a friend, journalist by profession who normally should be sitting and doing the interviewing, but is on the other side of the couch today. Nicolette, Arends, how are you?
Very well, Ronald. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, really appreciate it. I think thank you for coming through. It's really an honor and a privilege. I think you might have noticed from the videos that we've done before that mainly we've had a male guest list, as it were, because I think flowing from the book that I wrote on fatherhood and the relationship between the fathers and sons. But I think it's expanded now, and we're talking more about not just with the sons, but with the daughters as well, where you come in. And I'm trying to think now for you, how was your relationship with your dad when you look back when you were growing up and up until you are today?
Yeah. You know, Ronald, I was very blessed to grow up in a household where I had both my mom and my dad. And I say blessed because I know that is not necessarily the norm these days, sadly so. And so I'm the firstborn. I've got a brother and a sister that follows me, and we were a generally happy household. And it wasn't without our ups and downs. There were lots of challenges, lots of struggles that we had to overcome, because I think parenting also, it doesn't come with a manual. Many people say that.
Sure.
I think for my parents it was also just to see what works best. And but I think generally what I am today is also very much based on the fact that I had both mom and dad in the house.
And do you think potentially there was a bit more pressure on you as firstborn versus perhaps what your siblings had to go through after they came along?
Yes, absolutely. Mom and dad were very strict when I came along. And you sometimes think like, why are they not that strict with the siblings that follow you?
Sure.
So I think there was a lot of pressure. I was a very obedient child. I was very exemplary. I had to perform well in school. I had to do the chores at home. But I think it's just, it was part of a normal family.
Yeah. And I think looking at where you're coming from as a colored person in South Africa, the stats, like you're saying, are not really that encouraging, when you look at the households, perhaps that you're growing up in the same neighborhood or whatever. And we see in terms of that particular section of the population, you see that there's a lot of fatherlessness going on there, and there's a lot of absent fathers, if you can talk about it in the families. Is it something that you experienced or that you saw perhaps in the families that around you, in the families in your community, perhaps in your relatives, somewhere around like that?
Absolutely. There were many parents or many households that didn't have a father. Fathers that were either absent, they were maybe present in the house, but they were emotionally absent.
Sure.
Alcoholism played a big role. Gangsterism played a big role. Some fathers ended up in prison. Some fathers died very young. There were just many in the schools that I attended to. I mean, it was not uncommon to be friends with somebody who only had a mom in the household or a dad that's there but not present.
Yeah. And I think when you touch on that issue of alcoholism, we look historically and we see how the apartheid government actually tried to use that to dumb down, if we can use that, the colored population, especially in the Western and the East and the Northern Cape in South Africa. Do you think perhaps it's something that really has had, even today, an effect that's resonating through to this generation, or is it something perhaps that you think at the end of apartheid really ended, and if you look at the levels of alcoholism, therefore, in the colored community today and elsewhere, it's the same? What's your take on that?
I don't know what the stats say specifically, but I would imagine that it didn't necessarily die down.
Yeah.
And I would even want to take it back further to say that it has a lot to do with a lack of identity.
Okay.
And where parents, or let me say specifically fathers, don't know who they are, they try to seek, and I mean this is for all of us, we try to seek validation or acceptance in so many other things. And so alcoholism in the colored male community played a big role, or plays still a big role. Gangsterism as well, the sense of wanting to belong somewhere. So if you don't know who you are, and you are strong in who you are, you lack identity.
Sure.
You will go and find and try and find this in anything else. And so you also find a population or a percentage where you've got men that have multiple children from different women, because they also probably want to seek validation or lack identity in that sense. And so it has a ripple effect to the next generation.
Sure.
And now you grow, you sit with a child who's grown up in a home where father's always drunk or abusive or shouting. When he's present, he wants to like put his stamp down, or he's not there, and you have to make do without the dad, or seeing what the effects that it has on your mom as well. Maybe the mom was a victim of abuse as well by the hands of the father, and moms have to work so much harder. They can't even think about taking a holiday or resigning or taking on a new job just because they want to.
Sure.
It's out of necessity that they just have to keep on working because the pots need to cook. And the kids need to be fed. And and also then another spin-off from that is you find moms that are now standing in the role of both mom and dad. Moms that are much more aggressive, that are stern, that takes the role of the dad.
Trying to be a man in the house as well.
Trying to be a man in the house. And that's actually not a role. God has ordained it in a way where we've got moms and dads for specific reasons. And then I was having a conversation with my sister the other day, and we just realized again how both mom and dad reflects the face of the father.
Sure.
God the Father, where the mom comes with the tender, loving care, nurturing side, and dad is there to affirm, to bring identity, to be the protector, to be the provider. And together, they actually beautifully reflects the face of the father.
Sure.
And so if the one is not there, then the other one has to overcompensate. Or has to fill in. And I think children need both. They definitely need both.
And you actually touch on things that really come out strongly in the book that I wrote as well on fatherhood and the relationship between fathers and sons. Especially particularly when you speak of identity, you speak of the provision and role, the protection role that the father has to provide over his family, as it were. And you being privileged, of course, to be one of the few, like I think the stats at the time I wrote the book were saying about 6 out of 10 kids in South Africa grow up without a dad. I think that just cuts across all racial groups, the colored community, the black community, the white community. And now you obviously being part of the privileged few, that 40% that had their dads and their moms at home, do you think perhaps there was something that you gained extra that people that wouldn't have had their fathers at home don't have, that you actually benefited and got extra from, do you think?
I would love to believe so. I mean, I've got a really good relationship with my dad today and with my mom. And there are different aspects that both of them brought to who I am today. I discovered, my dad is such a, and this comes out to personality, so it's not a common thing for all dads, but my dad is a walking encyclopedia.
Okay.
He is just knowledgeable, and if he doesn't know, he'll go and find it out. Back in the days, he used to go to his books. Now he can also go to Google. But and his caring nature, he's such a carer for people and for just the environment and for people that don't necessarily have a voice always. He's an activist. I really feel that what my dad brought to our household and to our family largely contributed also to who I am today.
That's good.
And I consider myself.
And your dad having contributed, like you say, to the person that you've become today, what are some of the issues you think that he's been an activist for that you are also having to take up now and try to fight for as well going forward?
Oh wow. He's a voice for the underdog. The ones that don't necessarily have voices or that are quiet, or he loves his community where he works, where he stays in now. They've recently retired and they stay along the west coast. And so they've recently started to plug into a new community, but they've really embraced this. And I feel for me also, I feel I'm a community person where I am. And he used to work at a tertiary institution for a long time, and he used to have a lot of students that would look up to him and come and ask for advice, whether it's financial advice, often because he worked in the financial aid office, but also just on life.
Yeah.
And I feel in that aspect as well, I've also gained a lot from him. I would like to believe that people feel free to come and talk to me about things, and that I'm a good listener.
Yeah, that's why I'm here. So I think when you look at that, the life your dad has lived, and all the activism and all the stuff that he's done, with all these young people in their lives for forever and a day until his retirement, of course, and your career now as a journalist, globetrotting and flying around on the continent, meeting different people, experiencing different cultures. Do you think perhaps there's something that he would have taught you then that kind of prepared you for the life that you live now?
Oh, wow. Sure, Ronald, you're asking deep questions. I think he's very curious. I picked up my sense of curiosity from my dad.
Okay.
He's curious, he wants to know things, he's a discoverer, an adventurer, and he loves different countries and cultures. I think that is also something beautiful that I picked up from him and that I love, discovering, just differences in people that can unite us. So I think those are some of the main things.
And what you've picked up now, I think, especially we spoke about you having stayed in Kenya for quite a bit, and obviously looking at all these kaleidoscope of cultures around, the African continent, as it were. Would you say there's a country that you specifically have a good heart for from those that you've traveled thus far?
Sure. I love the whole continent of Africa. I would like to say, no, I'll give you one, but I like to say, if you cut my heart, you'll probably see it's the shape of Africa.
Ooh,
so corny, but yeah, that's me. But I love the whole continent, but I've got a particular affinity for East Africa, and I've recently went to Ethiopia, and I just completely fell in love with Ethiopian culture. They're completely different to the rest of East Africa. The language, the food they eat, their culture, the music, the way they dance, everything. And I'm a bit embarrassed to say I have not been to your beautiful land yet.
The most beautiful country in
Africa.
The
most beautiful country. Maybe I will change my mind once I've visited there.
Sure.
Which will be soon. I can't wait to go to Zimbabwe. So.
No, definitely you'll try. You'll enjoy it. Trust me. Now I'm looking at you now, thriving in the media industry where you're at currently at the moment, and I'm looking at the relationships that you obviously have to build, to make it work. The camera people that you work with, the producers that you work with, and when you look at the relationships that you have and how people kind of carry themselves. Do you think it almost goes back to how they were raised and how, if at all dad was in the house, that potentially they could be different people and would have relate differently with you on the job, you think?
Yeah, I think definitely the house, we say the building blocks of society, it starts in the house, in the family unit, that's the basic one. But I think also as you grow up, even if you don't have it, it's not all lost to you. I think again, the issue of identity is so important. If you are in your adult years and you've not had the privilege of growing up in a household where there's both a mom and a dad, it's not all lost. I think once we find out who we are, and I'd like to add as well, and whose we are.
Yeah.
There's a sense of understanding that comes with it, and taking up a role, and we know that it's not just day after day after day. There's actually a purpose to our life, and so the day we discover our identities and who we are and what our purpose is, I think that is just it can transcend everything that has happened before or that have not happened before.
Sure. And when it comes to that aspect of identifying and understanding whose you are very active in ministry. You've led a number of ministries, I think, up until that. I think you're still leading some, if I remember from our previous conversation. And I'm trying to think now, how important do you think, in terms of perceiving God the Father, do you think having a physical father helps in assisting that conception phase? Because I'll say this, I grew up for most of my life without a dad. And I think, of course, the rebellious nature that kind of came into me was partly as a result of not having that authority over me, you know, to kind of try and set me and put me in my place, as it were. So, of course, when I finally got born again, you know, understanding, therefore, and accepting the authority of God and His provisional nature, and was a bit difficult for me to conceive. And I'm thinking now, when you are ministering and meeting all these young people in the various ministries that you kind of involve yourself in, do you see people potentially reflect some of those things that I have just spoken about, or even worse?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. I think we also see God the way we often relate to, or we relate to God the way we related to our physical father. If the father was very strict, we tend to see God as a very strict father. Or if he was absent, you think that your prayers are only hitting the roof, the ceiling, and God is not hearing you, He's not there. Or there are so many different ways we can relate or perceive God based on how our own physical father's role was in our life.
Sure.
And, you know, when we become born again, you've now brought in that concept of being born again. You become a new creation and you are being refathered. You get a new father and you're being adopted into his family. And so many of us, even though we are now adopted and we've got a new father, we still live our lives as if we are orphans, as if we don't belong anywhere.
Sure.
And I think, again, identity, once we know who we are, who we belong to, and our rights and our privileges and our, you know, the authority that comes with that, we start seeing life differently.
Sure.
And we start relating to people differently. And even when we become parents, we parent differently. Because now we've got a different understanding of parenthood altogether, or fatherhood altogether. That's what I would say.
All right, interesting. And I think I always end with this question when I interview people, you know, to say that if potentially you had this video going viral and everybody in the world gets to watch this thing, you know, what's the one message that you'd love to give to the world today, Nicolette?
Sure. I think I've said it, but find out who you are and whose you are. and I think that will make each one of us a better human being. How we relate to others, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to God, and how we relate to the next generation.
Thank you very much for that. Find out who you are, find out whose you are, and that's going to really help you and try to actually become a better person in society, and hopefully a better parent as you go forward, you know, to both your children and your parents before you. Otherwise, until another episode of Taura Tinzwe, this is Ronald signing out. Nicolette, thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. I know you've got a lot of things to do and a lot of places to go around to, but otherwise we really appreciate you coming through. Till the next time, adios.